Welcome to Love Lies Chronicles.
I'd really appreciate your comment. It helps me understand if you enjoyed the story and how I can improve in future ones. My name is Daniel Reeves, 40, project manager in Austin, Texas. Tuesday, 8:22 p.m. I was at the dining table marking up a punch list for a hospital build when her phone lit up on the kitchen counter. Not a full message, just a first name and a preview bubble that flashed, then dimmed. It wasn't family, and it wasn't a client. I didn't cross the room or touch the device. I drew a box around HVAC coordination, signed my initials in the margin, and kept reading. The kitchen looked the same, but I knew exactly what that flicker meant. A conversation I wasn't part of had just walked into our house. I kept my pen moving because it was the only thing that needed my attention. The pattern was steady. Late-night showers after staying at the office. New passwords on her phone and laptop when we'd never locked them from each other. Girls' night on a Monday. Laughter in the hall that stopped the second I stepped out of my office. I made dinner, hit deadlines, took out the trash, and said nothing. I'm not the type to scroll through someone's messages or trail a car through traffic. Observation was enough. It told me what I needed without turning me into a man I wouldn't recognize in the mirror. Small things stopped being small. She canceled our anniversary dinner for a client emergency, yet a receipt I found in my jacket pocket after dry cleaning. Hers, not mine. Showed 2 Malbooks and a dessert we don't order. A rideshare alert pinged our family iPad. Drop off 2 blocks from home at 11:37 p.m., though she'd texted she was already in the bath. A pale blue scarf I didn't recognize sat folded on the passenger seat of her car. The laundry basket held a shirt that smelled like a stranger's cologne. I tried to offer a way back to honesty. How was your day? Fine. Busy. She reached for her phone before she reached for me. When I asked about the new passwords, she smiled as if I were cute for noticing and said she'd been hacked. We ate takeout at the kitchen island in the kind of silence people mistake for peace. Later, while she showered, I checked the shared calendar on the family iPad, the one we use for bills and appointments. A recurring lunch had appeared near her office with the same first name I'd seen on her lock screen. The house said the rest. Her robe started showing up in the guest bathroom. An overnight bag lived by the front door for the gym, but it never contained gym clothes. Our playlist disappeared from the Spotify account we share. A new one called Reset played after midnight when she thought I was asleep. The ring dish on her nightstand sat empty 2 nights in a row. Swollen fingers, she said, flexing a hand that didn't look swollen at all. She began parking on the street instead of the driveway and came in through the side gate to avoid the sensor light. By Thursday afternoon, I knew waiting would only widen the damage. I left the site early, stopped for printer paper, and came home to a quiet house. I rolled out the gray carry-on she uses for conferences and set it by the front door. I cleared space on the kitchen island, moved the fruit bowl, wiped the counter, and stacked the week's mail by category. I pulled her charger from my office and set it next to the suitcase so she wouldn't have to look for it. I put a spare toothbrush on top. I wasn't staging a scene. I set boundaries for myself. On my laptop, I suspended one authorized user on a card. I redirected next month's utilities to my personal account instead of the joint. I put the car title, mortgage statement, and insurance in a manila folder on my desk. I set a reminder to call a divorce attorney at 9 a.m. tomorrow. None of it felt dramatic. It felt like locking a job site after hours. Lights off, gates closed, tools counted. She had made her choices. I was protecting the part of my life I still owned. She came in at 9:37 p.m. The door bumped the suitcase, then hit the stopper. Same cologne on the towels, same quick glance toward the driveway before she shut the door. "You're up," she said, careful, like someone sticking to a script she didn't fully believe. Her phone buzzed in her hand. The same first name pulsed on the screen and vanished. I didn't ask who it was or where she'd been. I stood in the living room where she couldn't miss the suitcase, the cleared counter, and the mail arranged like a clean checklist. She stayed by the door with her keys in a fist, ready for an argument I wasn't giving her. I nodded toward the carry-on and spoke in the even tone I use on a site when something needs to be said once and clearly. "Pack your bags for him. I'll make sure the divorce is ready by Friday." The keys stopped moving. Her mouth opened, then stalled. The coat slipped from her arm to the floor. You knew?" she said, but it wasn't a question that required an answer. I let the silence carry the weight of the truth and didn't add anything else. She didn't move at first. Then she set her keys on the console and tried to rewind the scene like it was a bad take. Her jaw steadied, shoulders squared, voice soft enough to sound reasonable. She asked if we could talk, if I could explain what I thought I saw, as if clarity were the problem. I kept my hands at my sides and let the suitcase sit where it was. No pacing or raised voice. Just the line I'd already said hanging in the room like a closed door she didn't know how to open. The script arrived fast. You're imagining things. It's just a friend from work. You're paranoid. She offered them one by one, testing which version might stick. She held her phone against her chest like it needed warmth, screen dark, thumb hovering near the side button. I stood still, watched her try 3 angles of denial, and let each one fall without catching it for her. She went for proximity next, 2 careful steps into my space, palm to my forearm like we were fixing something together at the sink. I stepped to the side, and the contact ended by itself. My eyes went to the carry-on, then back to her. The point wasn't to humiliate her. She read my face, saw nothing to argue with, and reached for a different tool. Provocation. So you're just going to throw away our marriage? The sentence had volume and tremble in equal parts, an accusation dressed as a plea. I looked at her once and used the only words I planned to give the entire night. You already did. I said it in the same tone I use when a contractor asks whether a beam is load-bearing. Factual. Final. The color shifted in her face, and she blinked like she'd been hit with light. I let the quiet return and did not fill it. She tried to build a case. Started with overtime, then pressure, then how I'd been distant lately, as if the distance hadn't been the gap she created and then lived in. She listed small domestic grievances and tried to stack them tall enough to hide a choice. I let the stack wobble on its own. I opened the dishwasher, put in the 2 plates from the counter, and closed the door. She watched the ordinary movement like it was a verdict. The next play was community. She said her friends thought I'd become controlling, that her mother worried about my temper, that a coworker noticed I hovered. She said it like witnesses had entered the room. I didn't ask for names. I made a note in my head. The story had already been traveling without me. I turned off the porch light, locked the deadbolt, and set the alarm like I always do before bed. Consistency is a better answer than a monologue. She pivoted to solutions that preserved her control, temporary separation, counseling to see if we should continue, a trial month with no labels so she could clear her head. Each option kept me on standby while she held the keys. I let her finish, then moved 2 packages from the hallway to the dining chair so she wouldn't trip on them. Her eyes followed the boxes like she was looking for a clue I refused to hide in words. Then came the pressure points. Money, the house, what we would tell people, where she would go if I threw her out, as if the suitcase were a catapult instead of a boundary. I opened the mail I'd sorted earlier and placed the statements I'd already moved into a manila folder. She watched the folder close and understood more than my lips would have said. I kept my voice and used. Silence is clean. It doesn't have to be defended later. Tears arrived late. She sat on the bottom stair, shoulders shaking, phone face down on the tread beside her. She said she didn't mean for this to happen, that it wasn't serious, that nothing physical had happened, then corrected herself to not much, then to once, then back to you're overreacting. I brought a glass of water from the sink, set it on the second stair within reach, and returned to the living room. Compassion is not negotiation. I kept the difference clear. The night thinned out. She wandered the kitchen, opening drawers she didn't need, side-eyeing the suitcase as if it might move on its own. I powered down my laptop, put the folder in my briefcase, and turned off the lamp. She asked if we could at least sleep in the same bed, so we don't do anything we'll regret. I took a spare blanket to the guest room and left the door open. The balance had shifted and it stayed shifted. Her frantic need to control the narrative kept breaking against my unshakable silence, and by midnight, even she stopped trying to speak over it. I woke in the guest room at 6:30 to quiet and a clean list in my head. Coffee, shower, documents. At 9 o'clock on the dot, I called a family law office I'd flagged weeks ago, but never used. The receptionist offered next week. I asked for anything today. An opening appeared at 11:15 with Elena Mora, board certified. I took it, confirmed the address, and hung up. I texted one line across the hall so there'd be no confusion. We'll handle all further discussion through counsel. No insults, just a boundary in writing. Preparation looked like work because it was. I printed the last 12 months of bank statements, mortgage and car notes, insurance policies, the house deed, and retirement summaries. I added the rideshare receipts, the restaurant bill with 2 glasses of Malbec, and the calendar screenshots from the family iPad, recurring lunches labeled with the same first name I'd seen on her lock screen. I wrote a simple timeline with dates and times, plain language. I photographed every room as it was at 8:10 a.m. for a baseline inventory and saved everything to a thumb drive in a fresh cloud folder I created under a new email. Money wasn't a weapon. I opened a separate checking account and redirected my payroll. I suspended her authorized user status on one card and lowered the limit on another to prevent surprises. I paused automatic transfers into the joint savings and set separate autopays for my car and phone. I did not drain anything. I moved what I needed to cover my half of living expenses and placed a note to myself. No large transactions until after filing and temporary orders. At 10:40, I left for the meeting with a black folder and the calm you get before a site inspection. The lobby was quiet, framed certificates on the wall, nothing dramatic. At 11:18, I sat across from Maura while she scanned my one-page timeline before touching the deeper stack. She didn't ask for gossip. She asked for facts, assets, income, liabilities, dates, witnesses, digital trails, any prior counseling, any incidents that might require emergency orders. I answered the questions like I was walking a foreman through a punch list. Direct, complete, no detours. Strategy came in layers. File petition this week. Request temporary standing orders that freeze major financial moves on both sides. Seek exclusive use of the residence for 30 days to stabilize logistics. If she wanted to remain, fine, clear house rules and separate bedrooms, but any third-party overnights would end access to the property. Exchange initial disclosures within 10 days. Keep communications in writing. No confrontations or self-help. She slid a retainer agreement across the table. I read it, signed, and placed my card on top. Evidence review took 10 minutes because I'd already done the work. She flagged the calendar entries and receipts as enough to establish a pattern without turning me into a detective. She liked the room-by-room photos and told me to repeat them weekly. She suggested I export phone logs, not messages, and keep copies of any late-night arrivals from our security app. She underlined one sentence on my timeline. I did not search her devices and said it would matter later. I nodded. That line mattered to me already. We set service for Friday morning. Not at her office, not at a dinner table. At home, at 9 o'clock, with a professional process server and a comm script. A cover letter would go out to her counsel the same day, inviting cooperation on temporary arrangements. I asked about the car and the joint account. She told me to keep paying the mortgage, document everything, and avoid sudden changes beyond security and payroll. Do less than you think you can. Let the orders speak, she said. It matched the way I was already moving. I left with a copy of the filed petition draft and a checklist. On the way home, I stopped at the bank to formalize my direct deposit change, then at a mailbox store to rent a private P.O. box for legal mail. At home, I scanned my driver's license, passport, and social security card into the secure folder, then put the originals with the deed and insurance in a small fireproof safe. I updated two-factor authentication on my email, cloud storage, and payroll, removed shared devices from my accounts, and created a new Apple ID just for backups. Communication stayed minimal. She sent a string of messages at lunchtime. Questions first, then accusations, then questions dressed as accusations. I answered once. Your attorney can reach Elena Maura. You have the name and number on the notice when it's served Friday. When she asked if I'd be home tonight, I replied, yes. I'll be in the guest room. The main bedroom and bath are yours until temporary orders clarify use. In the afternoon, I did the small things that keep problems from growing teeth. I photographed jewelry and electronics and emailed the images to myself. I labeled 2 shelves in the hall closet, shared documents and personal, and placed the black folder on the first shelf with a paper copy of the petition draft. I packed nothing of hers. I did box duplicate household items, extra sets of towels, a second coffee maker, gifts we never opened, and stacked the box near the door with a printed inventory on top. Not punishment. HR took 15 minutes. I updated my beneficiary designations from spouse to my sister for now, added a secondary, and removed her as emergency contact. I left her as the contact for the house alarm, so there'd be no surprises if a late-night door opened. I uploaded my latest pay stub to the secure folder for disclosures, plus the last 2 years of W-2s. I made a note to pull utility bills and property tax receipts after dinner for the budget worksheet the court would need. By early evening, the house felt like a job site after the crew leaves, quiet, aligned, safe. She came home at 6:12, saw the guest room door open, and hovered in the hall. She asked to talk. I stood in the living room where we had stood last night and repeated the boundary. Everything through counsel now. You'll be served Friday at 9. There will be a cover letter inviting temporary agreements. Until then, the house functions with 2 rooms and clear schedules. No heat in my voice. The words did not bend. She tried the same sequence in different packaging. Hurt, outrage, logistics, bargaining. I didn't let any of it knock me off center. I cooked eggs and toast, offered her a plate, and ate mine at the dining table with my laptop closed. After dishes, I finished the property inventory, numbered each room's photos, and stored the files in the new cloud account and the thumb drive. I placed the thumb drive in the safe, logged out, and turned off the office light. Before bed, I drafted a short email to Maura confirming the service time, the P.O. box address, and my schedule for the next week. I attached the bank and mortgage statements I hadn't given her in person and hit send. I backed up the timeline, added today's entries, and closed the notebook. The last thing I did was stand in the doorway of the main bedroom and look at the bed I wouldn't be using. Not with anger. With the kind of clarity you get when you stop arguing with gravity. Tomorrow would move the process forward. Friday would put it in writing. I turned off the hall light and went back to the guest room, not to escape, but to sleep like a man who had finally chosen his own side. Morning came without conversation. She hovered in the hall while I made coffee and reviewed the checklist Maura had sent. When she asked if we could pause all this and talk privately, I kept my voice even. Everything goes through counsel now, and service is scheduled. Her eyes went to the suitcase by the door like it had moved closer overnight. I added one sentence so there would be no confusion about the direction of travel. By Friday, this house will reflect the truth you created. I didn't explain what that meant. The point was clarity, not debate. Her story shifted on contact with that line. It was just harmless fun, she said at the kitchen island, framing the words slowly, like careful placement might change their weight. When I didn't react, she tried a second cut. I didn't mean it. She waited for a question, a concession, something she could grab. I rinsed my cup and set it on the rack. She tried once more, voice tight. You're overreacting. I dried my hands and answered with logistics. Who would use the main bath in the mornings? How we'd avoid overlapping schedules until orders arrived. She blinked at the ordinary details, as if they were more final than anger. Revisions kept coming. She told me the lunches were professional, that the bar receipt was from a team celebration, that the rideshare alert must have been a glitch. She explained passwords with a fake hack story she had already used once. I didn't challenge any of it. I wrote an entry in the timeline, date, time, claims, and filed it. When I moved a load of laundry from washer to dryer, I handed her the lint trap like we were just maintaining a machine. If there was a way back for her, it wasn't through me parsing excuses. Seduction arrived at dinner. She cooked a meal I like, set 2 plates, lit a candle she normally complains gives her a headache, and put on the playlist we used on drives before any of this. She stood in the doorway of the kitchen in a robe I know she keeps for vacations. I thanked her for the food and ate at the table with my phone face down. When she reached for my shoulder, I stood to clear the dishes. Not punishment. Not a test. Just a boundary held in the open. Blame followed the soft approach. She said my long hours made her feel alone. She said I checked out months ago, that I had stopped planning date nights, that she felt invisible in her own house. I didn't argue about who planned what or when. I said, once, the process is moving forward, and we can discuss logistics in writing. She called that cold. Maybe it was. Temperature doesn't matter when you're framing walls. Plumb and level do. She tried panic next. A call to her friend in the driveway I could hear through the side window. Words like controlling, unreasonable, won't listen. Then a call to her mother, who asked in a voice loud enough for both of us if she felt safe. I took a photo of the garage door to mark the time she was out there. I gave the yard guy a thumbs up when he arrived early and asked if he should still trim the hedges. The hedges got trimmed. There's power in keeping the schedule. In the afternoon, she tried to negotiate the optics. Could we serve her at work instead, so it would feel less like an ambush? Could we tell people we were taking time apart and not use the word divorce until after summer? I said service was set for home at 9 with a professional and that a cover letter would invite temporary agreements. She asked who the attorney was. I told her the name. She turned it over aloud, like saying it could dull the edge of what it represented. The night before service, she leaned on Mercy. She said she didn't sleep with him in any real way, that it meant nothing, that she made a mistake, that she would end it today if I would just hit pause. I listened without adding sound. When she finished, I set a stack of labeled bins near the entry: work, toiletries, personal, miscellaneous. On the counter, I left 2 printed schedules, one for kitchen and laundry use, one for weekend item review, with blank lines for her to choose times. By Friday, this house will reflect the truth you created, I repeated. She read the labels and the schedules like they were a language she hadn't studied. Service day arrived. At 8:59 a.m., the process server knocked. I stood in the living room, out of the frame, hands at my sides. She answered the door in workout clothes, hair tied back like she was headed to a class. The server asked her name, confirmed it, and handed the envelope with a brief, practiced sentence. She took it, glanced toward me, and then down at the caption and the case number. No one raised a voice. She set the envelope on the console table and just stared at it. Within 15 minutes, the calls started again. A friend wanted to know if this was really happening. Her sister wanted to know what she did. Her group chat lit up with solidarity messages I could hear as vibration after vibration on the console would. She sent me a long text about how we could still fix this if I looked at the bigger picture. I replied once. Your attorney will receive a cover letter today regarding temporary orders, property use, and disclosures. She typed, unbelievable, then nothing for an hour. By noon, the apologies had dotted lines. She printed a letter and slid it under the guest room door. It used the words misunderstanding, loneliness, and desperate for attention. It asked for counseling and suggested we sign a no-contact agreement with the other man and try 60 days. I put the letter in the shared documents shelf so it would be part of the record and emailed Maura a scanned copy. Then I carried the bin labeled personal to the entry and left the lid open. In the afternoon, she tried gifts. A coffee from my usual spot, a new tie I'd once pointed at in a store window, a framed photo from a trip we took before the house. I thanked her for the coffee and set the other items on the dining chair. I said they could go with her belongings or be picked up later, whichever her counsel preferred. No anger in it. Just the new rules. Everything accounted for, nothing traded for access. The family arrived in the evening, her mother and sister at the curb, engines still running. I stepped onto the porch and told them calmly we're keeping communications in writing and that counsel would be in touch. Her mother asked if I could find it in my heart to delay filing. I said filing had already occurred and service was complete, and that any visitation or pickups should be scheduled through email. It wasn't a performance. It was the procedure we were already living. When the house quieted, she came to the doorway with eyes red but steady. If you wanted a reaction, you got it, she said. I set today's photos to upload, time-stamped each room as we'd agreed in the checklist, and looked at her without answering the bait. It was just harmless fun, she repeated, softer. Then, I didn't mean it. Then, barely audible, you're overreacting. The sentences sounded smaller now, like they couldn't fill the room. I pointed to the printed schedules on the counter. She chose 2 blocks for the weekend review and initialed them. I initialed mine. We set the papers side by side. The consequence was structure. By night, drawers had contents that matched the labels. The calendar had 2 names on it for the same address, each with defined times. The joint account had notes on every debit and credit. Her story kept changing shapes to find a version that would hold. Mine didn't have a story anymore. It had a process. The more she pushed for narrative control, the more the house answered for me. When I turned off the lights and walked back to the guest room, I didn't think about what might have been said differently. I thought about tomorrow's list, disclosures, photos, the first email from her counsel. The rest was already decided by the truth she set in motion and the boundary I refused to move. Friday afternoon, Maura emailed me the stamped petition and the proposed temporary orders. I printed 2 copies, slid one onto the shared documents shelf, and filed the other in my briefcase. No speeches. Paper, signatures, dates. The kind of work that doesn't need an audience to be complete. Her text arrived minutes later. Can we please talk one last time before this gets out of hand? I replied once. We are already in process. Please have your counsel contact mine. She sent 3 dots that never became words. That silence felt cleaner than any apology she could have written. Monday's hearing was brief and remote. The judge read the boilerplate, set financial restraints, and affirmed separate bedrooms until a move-out plan was signed. She kept her camera off. I kept mine on and answered only what was asked. When it ended, Morris said, "Good. Stability first." It was exactly what I wanted. We made a calendar for the week. 2 evening blocks to sort property, 1 morning window to remove her personal items, 1 Saturday hour to photograph what remained. She picked Tuesday and Thursday. I initialed each box and taped the schedule to the fridge. The tape made a louder sound than either of us. She tried to fold contrition into logistics. I'll take the guest towels and the blue set. You always like the gray, right? Also, I'm sorry. I nodded at the towels and wrote blue set, hers on the inventory. I didn't underline the apology or erase it. I returned my ring to a small envelope addressed to her attorney. No note, just metal and the date we agreed to place it there. I put our wedding album in her bin. I kept the photos of my parents and 1 picture of the house the day we closed. That was history I could carry without borrowing anyone else's version of it. Work stayed steady. I briefed my boss in 3 sentences, requested a week of flex time, and offered coverage for a teammate out sick. He nodded and told me to take what I needed. I didn't tell anyone stories. I sent updated contact info to HR and switched my emergency contact from spouse to my sister. It took 4 clicks. I signed a 6-month lease on a clean, small apartment near the Greenbelt. The manager asked if I wanted a second parking spot. I said no. Utilities, renter's insurance, internet. Each got a start date and a confirmation email saved to the folder. I bought a bed, 2 plates, 2 glasses, a pan, a broom, and left it at that. Her email arrived late. For paragraphs pushing counseling and a promise to cut contact with him for real this time, followed by a question about splitting holidays. I forwarded it to Maura and replied with 1 line. Please coordinate through counsel. I wasn't being cold. I was removing the heat that burned us both. Settlement talks were short. 2 calls, 1 Zoom. We divided accounts, vehicles, and furniture by line item. I kept the truck, tools, and my retirement. She kept the hybrid, her accounts, and the dining set. The house would list in 60 days unless one of us bought the other out. Numbers, not narratives. She asked for a face-to-face to say everything that didn't get said. I offered 15 minutes at the kitchen table with our phones on the counter and the door open. She arrived on time, hands empty. I listened. She said she had felt unseen. I said I heard her. She asked for another chance. I said, respect is not negotiable. She reached for a hug. I stepped back and pulled out the chair so she could sit instead. We reviewed the Saturday plan, marked a time for movers, and set a window for key handoff. When she stood, she said she didn't think it would end like this. I told her truth rarely announces itself with a script. Then I opened the door. Move-out day was practical. Boxes labeled, walls wiped, a final sweep through the drawers. I photographed each room after she left and uploaded the set to the property folder. I kept the spare keys on the hook until the listing agent arrived. When the agent asked how soon we could show, I said, next week. It will be ready. I dropped my copy of the keys at the attorney's office and drove to the apartment. I set up the bed, folded the 2 towels, and put the broom in the closet. I cooked eggs in the new pan and ate standing up because I was fine. The quiet didn't echo. It just held. She texted that night, I miss you. I let the screen go dark. Missing is not the same as respecting. 10 minutes later, an email from her counsel confirmed acceptance of the settlement framework and proposed dates for signing. I skimmed it and replied with availability. My answer took 23 words, all of them necessary. Over the next week, I changed small things that used to be invisible. I set my phone to do not disturb after 10, turned off shared photo memories, and removed our song from the playlist I use at the gym. I added a recurring calendar reminder for laundry on Sundays and for calling my parents on Thursdays. Simple, steady acts. The decree came with a stamp and a number. We signed in different rooms at the courthouse. She walked out first. I nodded to her on the steps. No last-minute speeches. I put my copy in a thin black binder labeled orders and walked to the truck. The sky looked exactly the same as it had that morning. That helped. I sent final confirmations to utilities, closed the P.O. box, and updated my address with the bank. I kept my promise about fairness and followed every order like a checklist. When friends asked what happened, I told them the only version that mattered. We didn't have the same definition of respect, and I refused to negotiate mine. Weeks later, she emailed me a photo of a dog at a shelter, saying he looked like the kind I always wanted. I thanked her for the thought and adopted him the next day without replying again. I named him Ranger. He sleeps by the door and follows me from room to room. I take him on morning runs along the green belt. Routine is a path. I changed my voicemail to my full name and removed the word we. I updated the emergency contacts on every form. I booked a session with a counselor, not to relive anything, but to build forward. On the day the for sale sign went up, I met the agent to sign a showing addendum. She asked if we should hide the ring-shaped indent on the console table. I said leave it. Houses keep their own records. When she left, I walked one slow lap around the rooms and locked the door behind me. I felt light on my feet. Respect didn't arrive with the decree. It arrived the moment I enforced it. That's the part one would tell any man who needs to hear it. You can't argue someone into valuing you. You can only remove your value from where it's ignored. I kept something I already owned, my standard. That night, I sat on my balcony with Ranger asleep at my boots and the lease folder under my hand. No fireworks. Just a man who made a decision and lived it. When my phone lit up with a message from an unknown number, I turned it face down. I didn't need to read it to know it wasn't for me. In the morning, I brewed coffee, answered emails, and left for the site review. The crew chief asked if we were moving forward with the beam change. Yes, I said. It's already in the plan. He marked it on the drawing and nodded. I walked the line, checked the measurements, and signed off. Then I went back to work.
Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.